A recession is coming. We don't know when and we don't know how severe, but we know one is coming. In fact, they happen on average every 7 years. So we know if it's not happening right now, it's gonna happen eventually and you need to be prepared. And I'm gonna share today the 5 tips that I would be taking to prepare for a recession. So number 1 is review where you stand financially. So we wanna understand primarily the balance sheet here. We wanna understand the assets that you own. Take for example, car, cash, house, investments, and also the liabilities that you owe. Maybe credit card debt, maybe car debt, maybe student loan debt. We want to make sure we have a very clear picture of what that balance sheet looks like. So assets that you own minus liabilities that you owe is your net worth. So we can then look at your balance sheet and say where you are very strong in, maybe where your weak spots are, and we can start to take action once we understand what that truly looks like. But until we have a true balance sheet, and I don't mean in your head or on a piece of paper that you just write and scribble some gibberish on, I mean an actual detailed balance sheet that has all of your assets and all of your liabilities in detail with interest rates and everything. And so obviously that takes care of the balance sheet, but the other piece of the equation is once we actually understand where we are, we need to figure out where our true free cash flow comes. And where does that come from? The budget. So you have to make sure you know all the ins and outs of your budget, making sure the true free cash flow, which is income or take home pay truly, minus your expenses, is your free cash flow. You take that free cash flow and you put it towards your goals. That could be debt pay down, that could be investments, that could be other things like a vacation or something fun as well. We need to make sure we know where every single dollar is going. And this isn't a very lengthy process if you have the right system. And in fact, I have a free budget template for you in the show notes below if you need one. So make sure these aren't just fixed expenses like just your car payment, just your utilities, but we have a true picture of all your expenses. And this means one-time expenses. And I have a trick for you in my budget training, which is free in the link below. Number 2 is debt pay down. And everybody needs amortization schedule. So to piece number 1 into number 2, all of the liabilities that you owe on the balance sheet should have an associated amortization schedule, or basically a schedule of your debt payoff. Exact principal, exact interest, if you pay any additional principal towards those specific debts, and all of the details of that debt. And if you're really nifty, you'll have a progress bar that tracks your debt payoff. This amortization schedule was the best thing that could have happened to me when I was paying off $304,000 of debt at one point in my life. It showed me everything from the beginning to the end, and I could see that, and it made me hungry to pay it off really quick. So coupling the amortization schedule with the budget and the balance sheet is an ideal way to do things. If you want to learn the whole systematic approach, look in the top right-hand corner and I'll add a video that goes over this systematic approach. Number 3 is consider your career and where it stands with what's coming. And I'll give you a good example. My dad was in the mortgage industry in 2008. And so it was exactly what I'm talking about here. He was not prepared. As much as I love my dad, as much as they prepared financially, they weren't ultimately prepared for what was to come. And to kind of foresee things like that happening, which obviously not everybody has a crystal ball, but to think forward is thinking, is my job in jeopardy if the economy tanks or if the economy changes? Which areas of the economy are going to be impacted the most based on this type of recession? Because recessions happen, like I said, every 7 years or so, but they are always different. Obviously in 2008, we know what happened exactly looking backwards, but to think about that as far as your career goes and relate that to potential loss of job is super important. And this is a good time to think about investing in your skill sets. I always say invest in yourself, whether it be education, whether it be mentors, or whether it be skills, something that can give you the edge on your peers when hits the fan. I want you to be in the best possible position if you were to lose a job. You can be very marketable across the board if you invest in skill sets and you improve that, because no matter what the economy is doing, there's a specific need for specific skill sets. You want to find that need and you want to develop a skill set for that need so that you're always employable. Number 4 is emergency fund prep. So if you don't have an emergency fund, you want to make sure this is top priority. You never know what's going to happen. Like we just talked about job loss. We don't know when the recession's coming. We don't know when all these types of things are going to happen, or maybe a spouse steps out on us. There's a lot of things that could happen that would really impact our finances. We want to be put in the best possible position so that we're not left behind. Now, how do you actually plan for your emergency? We want to make sure, back to step number 1, when we understand our budget and true free cash flow, we knew the expense allocation, right? We take the expenses on a monthly basis and we multiply those by 1 to 2, and that would be roughly your checking account balance. We would just keep that in there for basic bills. And in step number 2, we want to make sure we have 3 to 6 months of those expenses in a high yield savings account serving as our emergency fund. We want the initial initial buffer with our checking account to cover bills, to make sure there's float there. Then we want to make sure we really buffer ourselves with our emergency fund officially. Obviously, if you have other sinking funds on top of that for cars, for homes, for weddings, make sure those are planned as well. But you want to make sure you have enough cash sitting on hand for the worst of the worst to happen. At the same time, I don't want you to go over and above those limits for no reason, just because you feel it's going to be safe. Because if you live in fear your whole life, you're going to be broke, especially holding on to cash. Cash is a horrible asset to own, except for the oxygen you need. And then number 5 is stay locked in and very attentive to your situation. You should be able to tell me exactly what your expenses are at any given point in time, how much this expense is a percentage of all your expenses, how much this expense is a percentage of your income. We should be very dialed in. Do we have variable income? Is it fixed income? What does that look like on a monthly basis? All of those things should be exact, precise. We know our debt pay downs. We know all of our interest rates on our debts. We know exactly when those are going to be paid off. We need to know precision with everything. And again, with the right systematic approach, it doesn't take a whole lot of time. My students spend about 30 minutes a month doing this, but you need to use your financial statements religiously throughout this process. So one of the biggest issues I see with students coming into my Budget Dog Academy is the very first lack of clarity. They just don't know where they're trying to get. They have blinders on. And so once they actually piece all this stuff together, they have it, they feel a lot better because they have clarity, and they now can make educated decisions because they have their finances in check, which is what I want you guys to do in case a recession comes, because it will at some point. So I hope that gives you some clarity on what to do if a recession comes. I want to make sure everybody's in check. If you have additional questions, feel free to post them in the comments below, and I will make sure I get back to you, and I will see you next Monday.